Welcome to the Thriving on Purpose podcast, where we teach Christian entrepreneurs how to build a strong foundation of faith, growth, and skill to lead and thrive on purpose in life and business. And now, here are your hosts, certified coaches Elisabeth and Sebastien Richard.
Welcome to another episode of the Thriving on Purpose podcast. I am so glad, Sebastien, that you are back after a short leave where you've been working on different projects. And as we know, Father's Day is approaching, and I know you have a special treat. You have something very special reserved for Christian men that are listening in our audience.
I do have a special treat, and it feels good to be back, and I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for taking over the podcast for, 3 weeks, Liz?
Yeah, something like that.
Well, appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners benefited from that. But now I'm back, and yes, I do have a treat for our male listeners, especially if you're fathers, because it is Father's Day this Sunday, and I want to talk about something that really inspired me as a youth to prepare for manhood, to prepare for marriage, to prepare for fatherhood. I'm going to talk about a book that was written by Stu Weber, and the book was written quite a while back because I remember hearing an interview with him, and I was in my early 20s. So I don't have the exact publication date, but the book in question was The 4 Pillars of a Man's Heart. And when I was in my early 20s, he was on a TV program and he was being interviewed about that book. And those who know my backstory know that I didn't have the best childhood I did. My parents divorced twice. And as I was considering marriage, even though I didn't have a girlfriend at the time, I wanted to get married. That was something that was very dear to my heart. It was a desire I had. I wanted to have children, but I felt very ill-prepared for the task of being a leader in the home, being a good husband, being a good father. I didn't feel I was equipped for the task. And if we're honest, guys, many of us, even those of us who grew up in a very solid Christian household, might not feel quite up to the challenge. I mean, of course, if you were raised in a solid Christian household, it equips you better. You might feel a bit, maybe even a lot more confident than most to tackle this huge responsibility, blessing. Anyway, there's so many things attached to being married, to being a father. But not all of us feel adequate to tackle this task. And I was one of those young men who really didn't feel adequate. So when I heard Stu Weber on that TV program, I think it was Life Today. Anyway, so he was being interviewed and he had written this book, The 4 Pillars of a Man's Heart. And it touched such a deep core within me. And I remember at the time I shared it with a friend because I was like, you gotta listen to this guy, because I had taped I think it was spread over 2 episodes that he was being interviewed. So the 4 pillars of a man's heart are, number 1, the king. In every man's heart, there is a king. And it's so adequate since we've been talking so much on our podcast about the kingdom of God, about how God has made us into kings for his kingdom. So he's the King of Kings. Jesus is the King of Kings. So we're all little kings in his kingdom. And I think that many men, they feel there is a king inside. Sometimes for some of us, he's buried very deep beneath. But he's there nonetheless. And that king is there to provide. And the 4 pillars, what you need to understand when we're talking about pillars, we're talking about a pillar is something that upholds a structure. When you have a building and you have pillars upholding it, the pillars need to be very strong and straight up. If they bend on one side or another, the whole structure will collapse. So it's very important when you consider each pillar, that these pillars are strong and straight and not crooked. For example, the pillar of the king in a man's heart. If he leans too much on one side, he might become a tyrant. Or if he leans too much on the other side, he might lack the authority to lead and be too much of a kind of a wuss or a carpet, or someone who doesn't earn any respect in any way. So there's a delicate balance in the king pillar for someone who serves, but also for someone who leads. So the king pillar has to be very, very strong. And there's concerning the king pillar, there's a quote I found that's by Bill Johnson that epitomizes exactly what this should mean for a man on how his king pillar should be lived out. Okay? Bill Johnson said this. He said, "Rule with the heart of a servant and serve with the heart of a king." That's the perfect balance of the pillar of a king. So we are to rule with the heart of a servant. In other words, we are to be servant leaders. That's exactly what what King Jesus himself taught us, to be servant leaders. But we are to serve with the heart of a king. So while you're serving, don't forget who you are. The Lion King will be making a comeback this summer. It was a movie that I absolutely loved when I was younger because of the lessons, and also there was many lessons in that movie for young kids. But also, it was one of the rare movies of Disney where the father is the strong figure, as opposed to a mother in most movies. But as most Disney movies, the parents, they just get killed off. But although Mufasa gets killed off in the movie, the lessons that he taught Simba in that movie were very, he was taught by a good king. Mufasa was the epitome of the good, strong king with a servant's heart. And it's funny because I was looking at the preview of the upcoming, I guess you could call it real life version, but of course it's not real life. It's still animated, but with computers today. And there was a quote in the preview. It says, a good king always looks for what he can give, not for what he can gain. I kind of messed up the quote there, but that's exactly what it meant. And it was Mufasa in the trailer that's actually saying that. It's his voice, James Earl Jones. And I think that's exactly it. A good king looks for what he can give. And that's what King Jesus taught us. To be servant leaders, to give of ourselves. He said that the one who is willing to serve the most will be, the one who will be elevated the most by God. So do you have anything to add on the king pillar, Elisabeth? We're talking to fathers, we're talking to men. Is there anything that you've seen either in your father or in men in general, or maybe even in me, and I'm going to brace for impact, that would be a lesson for our listeners? There's something that you've noticed that you're like, I
think that really goes back to our roots. How it's sort of like in women, to want to be like princesses and queens, and I think. The same thing for men. It's like in our identity that God has put inside of us, because there's a bigger picture that who we're serving.
We have a great calling,
and that we're part of God's kingdom, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really a nice way to be reminded and to have that kind of mindset, because I think some Christian men can get a little, without wanting to, they mean well and they want to apply the servant leader, and sometimes they lack the backbone that goes with the king aspect. So it's having that nice balance and that strong mindset of a king that leads, with assurance and with love and but with authority as well.
Yes.
It's not like you said, being that guy that's just that yes man, and I think that's really important. I think as a wife, to be able to feel like you can have advice, that you can get advice and guidance from your husband as a smart leader in that way. And also as you raise your daughters, right? Daughters sense these things. They sense when their father is confident and how he leads.
They need that. They need a good king.
Exactly.
As a father.
You need that. And when I look at the kids, and I see that with Jason as well, they need that strong backbone sometimes, and that level-headed leadership that knows where he's going, that says, no, it's going to be like this for this and this reason, and guides them and explains things, even if they don't always like where it's going, but that they understand it has to be that way for their own good. And so all that together, I think that plays, as opposed to just a great, father type leader that just serves his family and not enough authority. There has to be that good balance, but authority with love.
Yeah, like a very well balanced pillar,
Yeah.
like I was saying earlier. Exactly.
Yeah, it's very important.
So, which brings us to number 2, the second pillar in a man's heart. Remember, there's 4. Now we're at number 2. The second pillar is the warrior. Not the worrier, the warrior. And the warrior pillar in a man's heart is because every man is meant to protect. Every man has a calling to protect those under his care. And for most men, that's our family. That's our wives. That's our children. And doesn't matter, if you're 5'6" or if you're 6'5", you have the warrior pillar inside of your heart. And again, we need a strong pillar that stands up, that's very, very straight. You don't want a pillar that's out of balance. And what happens when the warrior pillar in a man's heart gets off balance? Well, you end up with a brute. If it tilts too much on one side, you have a brute who can abuse his wife, beat his children, become violent. That is a pillar that is not straight up. And the other, if it leans too much on the other side, well, you end up with a man with, like you were saying earlier, no backbone. You don't feel like he's there for you to protect you. That he's strong. That he wants to that he would put himself between you and danger. And I think that in a man, usually, men have that instinct of, I'm going to protect you. We protect those we love. But sometimes men fail at that. And there was a lady on Facebook that's one of my friends, and wrote a long post this week. I'm not going to mention her name, of course, but and I was reading her post, and she was complaining that her brother-in-law was a brute, and when he came over with his wife, which happened to be the sister of her husband, he would always make comments, make her feel uncomfortable, make very, very disgraceful comments, even get too close and make her feel uncomfortable because he was kind of making awkward advances towards her. And there were many, many replies on her post, but I'm just going to boil it down. A lot of people were saying, where's your husband in this? Like, why doesn't he stand up between you and that guy? Or why doesn't he say to his sister, look, until your husband behaves, he can't come over, or he's making my wife uncomfortable, or something, just anything. And she was saying, well, he's not really confrontational. Well, see, that was a pillar that was leaning the other way.
Right.
I was talking about the brute, but this was a pillar
he'd rather stay out of it.
He was so non-confrontational that he was not doing his role. He was not fulfilling his warrior pillar. He was not doing what he's supposed or required to do by God. I think there's a just balance in a man's heart when it comes to the warrior pillar. That will make a man, without making him violent, will make him stand up. And that's what it's all about. To stand up between your loved ones and potential danger or anything that could potentially harm them. And it doesn't have to be necessarily something physical, although it can be. It can be a spider, it can be a physical threat, but it can also and should also be, for Christian men, for believers, anything spiritual that you find that could harm your family. It could be the music they listen to, the movies they watch, and stuff like that. And I myself have failed in the past at that at times. And sometimes my wife, to my shame, my wife would be redressing me and saying, "Where were you on that one? Like, you weren't standing up between whatever was on TV that day and your kids." And that's also part of the warrior pillar, being able to stand up for the integrity of your household, to make sure that nothing comes in there that's going to harm them, that's going to compromise their morals, compromise what they're learning. So that's also part of the warrior pillar. Which brings us to the third pillar. You have anything to add, Liz? Sorry.
Yeah, just before you go to the next one.
Yeah.
I think what I've seen oftentimes in church is that because we're so taught, God is love, He wants us to love everybody, keep the peace, men tend to forget about that warrior side, because probably, like in the story that you mentioned earlier with that lady in Facebook, either
turn the other cheek kind of thing.
Either he didn't want to be part of that just because he didn't want to confront that man, because he's a brute or whatnot, and he doesn't want to get into a fist fight or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or it's the mentality where, well, I'm gonna show peace, show love, they're related, so I can't I want to be this good image, this good Christian image, so I won't speak up. But all along it's hurting the feelings and being very disrespectful towards his wife. And even to the point where she feels like
threatened. She
shamed.
felt threatened, yeah.
Yeah, and it's getting out of hand. So I think it's really important to remember that, that yes, God wants us to show peace and love, and we're not to go out of our ways, to create situations where we pick up a fight with somebody, obviously. But it's important to respect our wives, and it's really important to have that, that protective side when it comes to your children. Like you said, spiritual warfare as well, spiritual warrior, praying for your family and being there for them in the spiritual side as well, not just, the protective side, the physical side.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to remember that, because I don't think, if Jesus had his own family on earth, I don't think he would have stood for something like that.
No.
We've seen what he did in the temple, just when people were trying to sell, in God's, temple, how he got upset.
There was once a meme I saw on Facebook, made me laugh. It said, when you ask what would Jesus do, always remember that making a whip, using it, and flipping tables might be an option. That's what it said, and I laughed because, our Lord had justified anger at that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was violent. It was a violent reaction. He actually made himself a whip to flog to flog those wicked money changers. Anyway, yeah. So, which brings us to number 3. The third pillar of a man's heart is the mentor. In every man's heart, there is a mentor. And it becomes more evident when we become a father. But for me, it was early on. When I met Elisabeth, I realized how much I liked teaching her stuff. Even on our first date. Remember this? When we went to the insectarium, it was like a museum where it was all insects. It was our first...
how could I forget?
Our first date. The first day we met. The first date we ever had. And we were in this insectarium, and where they had all these insects.
Okay, so you have to explain first off. You didn't bring me to see bugs.
I didn't bring you to see bugs. We were at the Botanical Garden in Montreal. So it was a beautiful place. There were beautiful gardens. But there was also on site this building in which we could enter and visit the insectarium where they showed you all the insects of the world, basically.
Which is somewhere I would have probably not entered. No. But anyway.
Yeah, but they were most of them were like dead in a glass, you know, with the scientific name underneath and all that. But I remember I was kind of proud to explain to her what one particular wasp did to, it was the Pepsis wasp, what it did to tarantulas, because I hated tarantulas. I think they're gross and disgusting. I'm not a guy who likes spiders. So I was talking about the warrior earlier. Well, you should see me when I have to kill a spider. I have improved, mind you. I have improved a lot through the years. Now I just crush them with my fist and a Kleenex, which is much better than the way I was when I was a young married lad. But
yeah, I would crush them.
But I manned up. I'm proud of it now. Now I'm the one who kills the spiders. But anyway, I was explaining to her how this particular wasp, which was much smaller than a tarantula, actually killed the tarantula and then laid her eggs on the paralyzed tarantula. And when the larvae were born, they would feast on the paralyzed spider. And I was like, this is my favorite wasp in the whole world. Don't you find this awesome? And she was kind of grossed out.
And then I looked at him and thought, wow, he really knows his insects. He
knows a lot of stuff.
He must read a lot of books on insects in his spare time.
But that was the mentor. That was all this to say that was my mentor pillar who wanted to teach. And the mentor pillar can also be off balance. If all you do is always trying to teach, you can become annoying. And the reverse can also be said of the strong, silent types. Those who never talk when they should, who let pass teachable moments, especially with your kids.
Right.
You have these teachable moments. And I've become quite a pro at handling teachable moments. Right, Liz? I mean, yes. I've become quite proficient at that.
Yes.
When there's a teachable moment, oftentimes I'm going to tell them a story from my childhood, a story from the Bible, something I saw in a movie once, and most of the time they're not annoyed. They will stay there to listen to the story. Other times they just run off, and I'm just speaking to the wall. But I've developed quite a knack for these teachable moments, and they're very, very important for your children, but also for you as a mentor to develop that sense of timing and that to let out those. Because it's, as a mentor, it's fun to teach, especially your kids, because they have so much to learn, right?
Yeah, and if your kids are a lot older and out of the house and you have all this wisdom and knowledge, why not mentor somebody that is in your church, somebody younger that needs that father figure, that doesn't have a father figure?
Absolutely. Always be willing, open, and ready for any younger man who might be in your surrounding that you might not be aware of, who might kind of hint at, because men, we're not good at asking for directions. So it's going to be kind of rare that a younger man's going to come to you and say, hey, you know what? I think you're full of wisdom and I would like to be mentored by you. So you kind of have to be in sync with what goes on around you. Sometimes you're going to notice when that younger man wants to spend more time with you, asks you a lot of questions. Those might be hints that, hey, I'd like to be mentored by you, or I'd like to spend more time, like a big brother. You know, I like that movement, that program, Big Brothers and Sisters of America. That's a good thing. It creates mentors and mentees, and it's a really, really good thing. And in church, we need that. We desperately need strong, committed men who love God, who are willing to give of that time, of that wisdom when it's appropriate.
Yeah, and sometimes there's men that really love to have to be around children and have I know, like, I'm saying this like scenario in my head, but I've seen it many times. Some men that have already quite a few children, 3 or 4 children, oftentimes, will have other kids over on the street so, other children that are friends with their kids. And it's really important to take those moments. Sometimes you'll notice that there's some of these kids that come around a lot more.
Yeah.
Oftentimes are kids that don't have that family bond, and they don't have that family unity.
Yeah, they might come from a divorced, maybe a single mom, or maybe the dad's not around, so they like being in your house because you're there, and it's kind of subtle. You won't always notice it, but a preacher was once telling the story. He was at the playground with his son, and the monkey bars, and his son was going on the monkey bars, and he said it was the most fascinating thing. As I was encouraging my son and praising him for his prowess on the monkey bars, all these other young boys on the playground came, and they went on the monkey bars, and they said, "Look at me, mister. I'm doing it too, mister."
Yeah.
Boys today,
they need that.
Desperately need, because we live in, and let's face it, one of the main crises in North America today is absent fathers. And a lot of boys are raised by mothers and no fathers. And they desperately crave and need that male encouragement. They need a male, an adult male, to encourage them and tell them that what they're doing is great, because they don't have that dad at home. And if you are a dad and you have access to your child every day, great. You can do that on a daily basis. But if some of you guys might be listening to me and you might be divorced, and maybe you see your kids only on weekends or maybe every other week, those times are going to become so crucial for your children to have you there to encourage them and to praise them and to make them feel loved, and make those pillars shine in their lives. Make
Right.
them see that king, warrior, mentor. And number 4, we're going to talk about the last pillar, the friend. In the heart of every man, there is a friend that is there to connect. So the king is there to provide, the warrior is there to protect, the mentor is there to teach, and the friend is there to establish such a vital human connection. When God created Adam and everything was good in his creation, the first thing that wasn't good in his creation was that the man was alone. The man didn't have anyone to connect with. So that's why God took from his side the woman and created the woman from the rib, from the side of the man. It was to create that vital connection partner, that friend, that vital connection that human beings need. We are social animals. Some of us more than others. I mean, some men are loners. I myself, I have to struggle sometimes. I have to overcome my pride to make male friendships. It doesn't come easy to me, so I have to be more open to it, let my guard down a little bit more. But it's so important for us to have, not only to be friends with our wives, that your wife should be your best friend. I mean, that's the person you should connect with at the deepest level, aside from God. But to also have male friends, male friendships and your wife, they're different. They bring a different dimension, something, different elements to your life. So yeah, in every man's heart, there is that friend to connect. And your children also need to feel that friend pillar. You're their father, you have the authority, you have the leadership. You're going to teach them all kinds of good things. You're going to protect them. But they also need to feel like, I can come and talk to my dad when I'm in trouble, when something's wrong. And we're not talking just when they're 6, 7, or 8 years old. We're also talking when they're 16, 17, 18, 20, 25. They need to feel that, hey, Dad's my friend. Dad's not going to judge me. He's there to help me. He's a friend, and I can talk to him. And that connection is established at a fairly young age.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you've noticed, these 4 pillars, the king, the warrior, the mentor, and the friend, they're all elements of the persona of Jesus Christ. Jesus was the perfect man. He was the fullest man, I guess you could call him. And all of his 4 pillars were expressed in their fullest capacity. And he was the best example for us for each and every pillar.
Mm-hmm.
And on Father's Day, I think it's so important to reemphasize that for guys out there, for fathers out there, to cultivate those pillars. Because as I went down the list of those 4 pillars, if you're like me, there's probably one of those pillars that you went like, you know what? I'm strong on 3 of those, but there's one pillar here that I know it's leaning. It's not solid. I need to work on that. You know, like I explained, if your 4 pillars aren't straight up and strong, the whole structure can collapse. You know, there's weakness in the structure, and you don't want that. You know, you want your heart to be strong. You want to be a man after God's own heart. And the way to do that, the way to be that, is to be aware of those 4 pillars. And if there is one area or one pillar that you feel is weakest, that you might be more vulnerable in, you can ask the Father and pray to Him and say, you know what, Lord, I'm weaker in that area, and I wish you would help me to develop that more with my wife, my kids first, but in my relationships in general. So that's something you can work on as a father. And I hope and pray that this has encouraged you today, because for me as a 20-something-year-old, maybe 21, something like that, when I heard that those 4 pillars, I was like, it really struck a chord within me. And I know I'm not alone. I mean, I know guys, when they hear that, they go like, oh yeah, this is so true. We have that inside our heart. That's how we're made. That's how God made us. And we're made to be a blessing through those 4 pillars. When they are well expressed, when they are well balanced, these 4 pillars make men strong. They make men a blessing for their families first, but also for the community and in a larger sense for the kingdom of God.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, even the friendship part, I think, is so important as your kids grow up. I think a lot of parents, a lot of men tend to, stay in that authoritative mode sometimes as their kids get older, because there are bigger problems and they just want to hold on to them more so that they don't wreck their lives and do stupid things. But at the same time, because they're, starting adolescence and they're trying to discover themselves, they're trying to figure out who they are as a young man, it's so important to have that friendship aspect as well, so that the communication keeps on flowing and they can learn from your mistakes.
And I think that vulnerability opens up friendship. If you stay, like you said, in authoritative mode as a parent, and you don't shift, because as they grow older, you're going to slowly shift to more like a counselor friend, counselor/friend. When they're young, you're there to tell them pretty much what to do, and they have to obey because it's for their own good, and they could end up hurting themselves or whatnot. But as they grow older, they become autonomous. They lead their own lives. Then you have to shift from that authority mode to a more like a I'm here for you mode. I can counsel you. I have experience, and I've shown you my vulnerable side. Because, for example, when your son or daughter does something silly or gets in trouble or whatever, it's always good to remind them or to remind yourself how you used to be, or what silly thing you might have done that kind of goes along those lines, so you can open up and say, you know what you did there, it reminded me of a story when I was a kid, or when I was a young man, or whatever. And then you tell them how that didn't play right for you, or how it didn't go well for you. You're kind of showing them, look, I made mistakes too, but here's what I've learned from that mistake. And then you can step in and kind of help them in their own, whatever they're going through. But you in order to be a good friend, you have to be vulnerable. And
it makes you more relatable, in the sense that I've noticed that when Sebastien will identify to Jason, for example, and he'll say, I remember when I was that age, I did that certain thing, and this happened, And Jason really, really listens.
He really does. It strikes a chord in him. He really pays attention when I tell him stories like that.
His dad is more relatable.
Yeah,
right?
he's like a human being like him. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, he's like me. Like he's not just my dad, but he used to be a young boy, and look, he's learned stuff. Oh, okay, maybe I should pay attention.
Exactly. So using that angle is so important. And as you grow up, as your kids grow, the same thing. Like I remember I was very, very close to my mom because of that, because she was able to talk to me as a friend, not only as a parent. Like she had a good balance of both. So that made her more relatable. I felt like I could confide in her, and she cared about the little things that I was going through in school, the little things that were happening in my life, my daily life, the relationships that I had in school and this and that. And that's why I try to do the same thing with my kids, even if they're very young, to ask them, what's going on in class. And I notice that when I spend some quality time, and I try to do it separate with the 3 kids separately, I notice that, like my older daughter, Marissa, she'll start talking to me about stuff that happened in school and this and that. And then she opens up a lot more.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. When they feel like we're just like we used to be like them, they're like, oh, I can talk to mom, I can talk to dad. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, all this to say, I wish you guys a great Father's Day. If you're a wife listening to this, make him feel like a king. And if you're a man listening to this, I really hope this has blessed you, because it blessed me so much, and I was very happy to share this with you guys this week.
So we wish you a great Father's Day. And if you want to get the 2 books by Stu Weber that we recommend that you read as a gift for Father's Day, if you want to buy yourself that, one of the books is called Along the Road to Manhood, and the other one is The 4 Pillars of a Man's Heart.
And another one that Stu Weber wrote, before I forget, I think it was The Tender Warrior. The Tender Warrior. And I think for the warrior pillar, that defines exactly what we're supposed to be. And in my book, Lead Like Superhero, one of the chapters was on Optimus Prime. And for those who grew up in the 80s, who love Transformers, that is exactly what Optimus Prime... That's why he struck a chord as a character with so many young boys of maybe, 5 to 15 almost. Because he was that tender warrior.
Right.
It kind of sounds contradictory, and yet when you are that, you will bless so many people. Anyway, so the other book is Tender Warrior by Stu Weber.
So we'll leave the links in the post of this podcast, so you can check it at thrivingonpurposepodcast.com. So we wish you a great Father's Day. Be blessed.
And thrive on.
Thanks for listening to the Thriving on Purpose podcast. Be sure to visit thrivingonpurpose.com to access the show notes and to discover more fantastic content. Until next time, be blessed and may you thrive on purpose.